Yemen itself, this is a country that has oil, but it's pretty poor, and the porous nature of its borders and the weakness of the government's difficulty in relating to the tribes in the area, and of course the tribal system is everything.
It is, and if the government can't control and influence the tribes, and if the tribes can be influenced by the message of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, then this is what perhaps is giving al-Qaeda there a chance to get a foothold, a chance and a space, the physical space, and the lack of pressure from security forces where they can develop new bombing techniques like the technique we saw with the underpants bomber, Abdul Muttalib, on that plane Christmas Day flying into Detroit. The explosives didn't go off, but this was a new technique being used. That's possibly what we're seeing here, and I think this is leading partly into what we're just hearing. We're just learning from the British government right now. Theresa May, the Home Secretary here, is saying that the British government, this is a statement just released by the Home Secretary here, saying that the British government is urgently studying ways and reconsidering its security position vis-a-vis freight flights coming directly from Yemen. So for the British government, this current state and situation in Yemen is cause for urgent concern. She also confirmed, not to digress here, but she also about Yemen, but she also confirmed that this suspect package being found today. She said that that the package is still being examined at this time. Her top priority, she said, for the safety and security of the British Isles. But she also said how Britain was working with its international partners at this time to try and run down all the leads that this current threat has been thrown up, and this current threat that everyone right now is pointing back to al-Qaeda in Yemen. Michael?
Yeah, as we wait for this Boeing 777 to arrive at JFK, we'll keep that live picture up there, being escorted in by a couple of US fighter jets after being escorted over Canadian airspace by Canadian fighter jets. Nick, what's interesting here is no explosive residue found on these suspicious packages. Obviously, they'd been tampered with, computer circuit boards and wires and the like there. It's an odd sort of situation. What's your sort of thinking on this?
I think it's very hard to say because we don't have all the facts at our disposal. There's been talk of dry runs. Al-Qaeda in the past hasn't been noted for doing dry runs. It tends to make a go of it and tries to do what it can. The Abdul Muttalib, the underpants bomber, failed, according to explosives experts, because he hadn't been properly trained, hadn't been through the dry runs of how to detonate those explosives. And that's one of Al-Qaeda's typical weaknesses that international terror experts generally point to, a lack of training. So could this be some kind of elaborate type of hoax? Are we going to get some kind of internet statement from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen saying, this is what we could have done, it could have been so much worse? It seems to be a surprise that somebody would really believe that they could send a package from Yemen addressed to synagogues in the United States without that raising red flags. And adding to this, again, the sort of the lack of thorough information that we have, that tip-offs, and this is what we're learning from British police here, that tip-offs led investigators to find the package in Britain at the East Midlands Airport in the first place. So none of this seems to add up. So perhaps we are going to learn that this is really Al-Qaeda just showing perhaps what they could be capable of, which comes down to something that they've talked about before, that Anwar al-Awlaki, this Yemeni cleric, has talked about before: maximum effect with little impact. And we've seen terror groups do it before. Right. It's a hoax. You don't have to do much, and it has a big impact. That's
exactly right. I mean, that is the definition of terror, isn't it? Nick, a point that we need to really raise every now and then is when we're talking about Al-Qaeda, talking about what we're dealing with here. This is not an organisation with an HQ you can go and bomb. It's not a traditional army. It is borderless, and it's an ideology. Talk about the difficulties in fighting an ideology.
Well, I think what we've seen unfold since September the 11th tend to show the difficulty in taking on an ideology. That there are times when the measures that are taken against taking on the people behind the ideology, they spin them and turn them around and use them against the West in this case. If you look at the internet media campaigns that Al-Qaeda's promoted and put out over the past decade, they've capitalized on what NATO, the United States, their allies have done in Iraq and Afghanistan. They turn things on their head and use it to their advantage. What we've also seen happen is that Al-Qaeda's gained over the past decade a stronger foothold in Yemen, a stronger foothold in Somalia, a stronger foothold in the Maghreb, the north of Africa, places that they are using as bases to train people or launch attacks. And we've seen as well that people in the United States, in Britain and in other countries in Europe will travel to these countries to learn techniques, to learn terrorist procedures and come back. We just had a statement a few months ago by the head of British internal intelligence, MI5, saying he fully expects an attack to come from people trained in Somalia by the Al-Qaeda elements in Somalia. So this, I suppose, is how you, when you look at the Al-Qaeda threat, what's happened and how tough it is to tackle, they're able to use what counterterrorism officials, what law enforcement agencies do, turn that on its head, use it against to enhance their global message. It appeals to a tiny, tiny fraction of people, but those people appear to be dedicated enough to pursue these types of potentially very deadly attacks, and we saw that in New York recently, and there are plenty of other situations we could point to as well, Michael.